Jiwon stared at the screen with wide eyes, and her coffee cup fell from her hand, making a loud crash on the floor of the Seoul Deep Space Communications Center. The numbers on her computer were dancing and jumping in ways she had never seen before, and her heart was beating so fast she thought it might break. After 15 years of listening to empty space through giant radio dishes, something was finally talking back to Earth. The signal was coming from somewhere near Jupiter, and it was not random noise or strange space weather. This was organized, structured, and most importantly, it was clearly made by someone who was trying to communicate. Jiwon quickly saved all the data and ran to find her supervisor while her hands shook with excitement and fear. "Min-jae, you need to see this right now," she called out as she burst into his office without knocking. Min-jae looked up from his breakfast, sandwiched with annoyed eyes until he saw the expression on Jiwon's face. He had worked with her long enough to know that she never got excited about false alarms or equipment problems. Within 30 minutes, half the building was crowded around Jiwon's workstation and everyone was talking at once. The signal was definitely artificial, and it was repeating the same pattern every few hours, like someone was trying to get their attention. Dr. Chan-woo, the center's director, called the government while other scientists started working on translating the message. The breakthrough came when Hyerin, a young mathematician, noticed that the signal contained basic mathematical concepts, like prime numbers and simple equations. Someone out there was using math as a universal language, just like scientists had always hoped would happen. Within 6 hours, they had figured out enough of the pattern to understand that this was some kind of greeting or introduction. Hyunwoo arrived at the center just as the sun was setting, bringing with him a team of government officials, military advisors, and diplomats. As Earth's lead diplomatic coordinator, he had spent years preparing for this moment, but now that it was really happening, he felt completely unprepared. The weight of representing all of humanity was sitting on his shoulders like a heavy stone. "What exactly are they saying to us?" Hyunwoo asked as he looked at the decoded message on the main screen. The translation was still rough, but the meaning was becoming clear. The aliens called themselves the Volani Federation, and they were announcing their peaceful arrival to establish trade relations and cultural exchange with the people of Earth. Mirai, who had been called in as the cultural attaché, was reading through the message again and again. The aliens seemed very polite and formal in their communication style. They mentioned their desire for friendship and mutual benefit, and they were asking for permission to approach Earth's solar system for face-to-face meetings. "They sound almost like they are writing a business letter," Mirai said with a small laugh that was more nervous than happy. "Very professional and respectful, but also somehow innocent, like they have done this many times before with other planets." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and emergency sessions. World leaders were woken up in the middle of the night, and every major government wanted to be involved in humanity's response. Hyunwoo found himself in charge of crafting Earth's first official message to an alien civilization, and he was terrified of saying something wrong. "We need to be welcoming but also honest," he told his team during one of their many planning sessions. "We want to make friends, but we also need to make sure they understand what they are getting into by coming here." Mirai nodded in agreement and pulled up her notes about human culture and Earth's environment. "We should definitely include some kind of safety information. I mean, we do that for human visitors from other countries, so it makes sense to do it for visitors from other planets, too." The team worked for hours on the perfect response, writing and rewriting every sentence to make sure it conveyed the right tone. They wanted to sound friendly and excited about the opportunity for contact, but they also felt responsible for warning the aliens about some of Earth's more challenging aspects. Their final message started with expressions of joy and welcome, thanking the Volani Federation for their peaceful intentions and expressing humanity's eagerness to learn about their civilization. They included basic information about human culture, government systems, and scientific achievements. But then came the part that the team had debated most intensely. Hyunwoo had insisted on including what he called a standard safety disclaimer about Earth's environment. The message explained that Earth could be somewhat challenging for visitors who were not accustomed to the local conditions, and that proper safety measures would be provided to ensure everyone's comfort and well-being. "Do you think we should be more specific about what we mean by challenging conditions?" asked Jae-ho, one of the younger diplomats on the team. He was worried that the warning was too vague to be helpful. Mirai shook her head firmly. "We don't want to scare them away before they even get here, Every planet probably has its own unique challenges, and I'm sure they will understand that we are just being cautious and responsible hosts. The team also included technical information about where the aliens should approach Earth for the safest possible first meeting. They suggested using the planned orbital station that had been under construction for the past 5 years, originally intended for deep space research but now perfect for diplomatic meetings. Meanwhile, far away in space, the Villani delegation was receiving Earth's response with great excitement and curiosity. Ambassador Kethvar, a tall, graceful being with pale blue skin and large, gentle eyes, was pleased by the warmth and friendliness in the human message. His people came from a world called Serenitas, which was exactly as peaceful as its name suggested. Serenitas was a garden world where the weather was always mild and pleasant, where dangerous animals had never evolved, and where natural disasters were completely unknown. The Villani had developed into a peaceful, scholarly species that valued learning, art, and gentle cooperation above all else. They had been traveling through space for centuries, making friends with dozens of other civilizations and creating a federation based on mutual help and shared knowledge. Science officer Zilnara, whose silver hair reflected her advanced age and wisdom, was particularly interested in the humans' mention of safety measures. In her experience, most civilizations only needed basic environmental controls like air, pressure, and temperature adjustment when visiting other worlds. She assumed that Earth's challenging conditions referred to something similar, perhaps unusual atmospheric composition or gravity levels. "It is refreshing to meet such a considerate species," Kethvar said as he reviewed the human message for the 3rd time. "Their concern for our safety and comfort shows a level of thoughtfulness that speaks well of their character." The Villani fleet began moving toward Earth's solar system, their ships traveling at speeds that would bring them to their destination in just a few weeks. Their vessels were beautiful, elegant things that looked more like works of art than machines of war, because the Villani had never needed to build warships or defensive systems. Back on Earth, preparations were moving forward at an incredible pace. The orbital station was being rushed to completion, with construction crews working around the clock to finish the diplomatic sections. Scientists were preparing cultural exchange materials. Linguists were refining translation protocols, and medical teams were trying to figure out what kind of first aid might be needed for alien visitors. Jiwon found herself appointed as the head of the communication team, responsible for maintaining contact with the approaching aliens and facilitating all future conversations. She was both honored and terrified by the responsibility, but she threw herself into the work with determination and excitement. As the days passed, the excitement on Earth continued to build, while in space, the Villani delegation traveled toward their new friends with happy anticipation. Neither side fully understood what they were about to experience, but both were approaching the meeting with hope, curiosity, and the best of intentions. The stage was set for humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and everyone involved was convinced that this was going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. The orbital station was buzzing with activity as the final preparations were being made for humanity's first official meeting with alien visitors. Do-hyun, who had been appointed as Earth's Minister of Alien Relations just 2 weeks earlier, was checking his notes for the 100th time while trying to calm his nerves. The title was brand new because nobody had ever needed a Minister of Alien Relations before. But the government felt it was important to have someone officially in charge of such an important moment. Soman was standing nearby with her arms full of safety equipment and emergency supplies, looking like she was preparing for a camping trip rather than a diplomatic meeting. As the head of planetary safety protocols, another newly created position, she had spent sleepless nights trying to figure out what kind of safety measures might be needed for visitors from another world. "Are you sure we need all of this equipment?" Do-hyun asked as he watched Soman arranging emergency kits that contained everything from radiation detectors to emergency oxygen supplies. "I mean, they are coming here voluntarily, so they must have some way to deal with our environment." Soman looked at him with the patient expression of someone who had spent her career planning for emergencies that other people thought were unlikely. "The aliens said they appreciate our concern for safety, which means they expect us to provide it. Besides, it is better to have these things and not need them than to need them and not have them." The station's main meeting room had been carefully designed to accommodate both human and alien needs, with adjustable atmospheric controls, variable gravity settings, and communication equipment that could handle multiple languages and possibly entirely different forms of communication. The walls were decorated with examples of human art and culture, chosen to represent the diversity and creativity of Earth's civilizations. 3 days before the scheduled meeting, the Villani ships appeared. On the edge of the solar system, their sleek forms easily visible through the station's telescopes. The ships were beautiful in a way that took everyone's breath away, with smooth curves and flowing lines that seemed to move like living things even when they were standing still. Ji-won was in constant communication with the approaching aliens, and she had been impressed by their politeness and patience. Every message was carefully worded and respectful, and they always asked permission before changing course or requesting information. They seemed almost too good to be true, like the perfect neighbors that everyone hopes to have but never expects to actually meet. On the day of the meeting, Do-hyun and So-min waited in the station's docking bay as the first Villani shuttle approached. The craft was smaller than expected, but just as beautiful as the larger ships, moving through space with a grace that human technology had never achieved. As it settled gently onto the landing platform, both humans felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety that made it hard to breathe normally. The shuttle's door opened with a soft hissing sound, and Ambassador Kethvar emerged, followed by Science Officer Zilnara and 2 other members of their delegation. The aliens were taller than most humans, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow softly in the station's artificial lighting. Their faces were gentle and curious, with large eyes that held an intelligence that was both alien and somehow familiar. "Greetings, people of Earth," Kethvar said in carefully pronounced English, his voice carrying a musical quality that made the words sound like poetry. "We are honored to meet you face-to-face and grateful for your warm welcome to your stellar system." Do-hyun stepped forward with a smile that he hoped looked more confident than he felt. "Welcome to our orbital station, Ambassador Kethvar. We are equally honored to meet you and excited about the possibilities for friendship between our peoples." As the formal greetings continued, So-min began distributing the emergency kits she had prepared, explaining each item with the cheerful efficiency of a flight attendant giving safety instructions. The aliens accepted the kits politely, but Zilnara's eyes grew wider as So-min explained the radiation detectors, emergency oxygen supplies, and something called predator deterrent spray. "Excuse me?" Zilnara interrupted gently, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "Could you explain why these safety measures are necessary for what we understood to be a routine diplomatic meeting in a controlled environment?" So-min blinked in surprise, as if the question had never occurred to her. "Oh, these are just basic Earth protocols. We want to make sure you are comfortable and safe during your visit, and it is always better to be prepared for any situation that might arise." Kethvar exchanged a quick glance with Zilnara, and both aliens looked slightly puzzled. On their homeworld of Serenitas, safety equipment was rarely needed because there was simply nothing dangerous enough to require protection from. The most serious safety concern in their civilization was the possibility of accidentally bumping into someone while walking through a garden. "Perhaps you could tell us more about these potential situations," Kethvar asked diplomatically. "We want to make sure we understand your world's unique characteristics so that we can be properly prepared." Do-hyun launched into what he considered a basic overview of Earth's environment, describing the planet as having some weather variations and a few natural phenomena that visitors might find interesting. He mentioned that Earth experienced seasonal changes and occasional geological activity, but he presented these facts in the same casual tone that someone might use to describe local transportation options. The aliens listened with growing concern, as Do-hyun explained that humans had developed extensive systems for monitoring and responding to various environmental challenges. When he mentioned that every human settlement had emergency protocols for situations like severe weather events, the Villani delegation began to suspect that they had seriously misunderstood something about Earth's nature. "When you say severe weather events," Zilnara asked carefully, "what exactly do you mean by that term?" "Oh, you know, the usual things," Do-hyun replied with a casual wave of his hand. "Thunderstorms, hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, floods, that sort of thing. Nothing too dramatic. Just the kind of weather that requires people to stay indoors. Or take basic precautions. The aliens' eyes grew even wider, and they began speaking to each other in their own language, with voices that sounded increasingly worried. On Serenitas, the weather was so gentle and predictable that they had never needed words for concepts like storms or floods. The idea that people could live normally on a world where the sky itself could become dangerous was completely beyond their understanding. Someone noticed their distressed expressions and tried to be reassuring. "Do not worry about the weather," she said with a bright smile. "We have excellent prediction systems and warning networks, so dangerous weather almost never catches anyone by surprise anymore. Plus, human buildings are designed to handle pretty much anything nature can throw at them." This attempt at reassurance only made the aliens more alarmed, because it implied that Earth's weather was dangerous enough to require prediction systems and specially designed buildings. Zilnara was beginning to suspect that their equipment had been malfunctioning when it detected what appeared to be massive storm systems and geological instability across Earth's surface. The cultural exchange portion of the meeting began with both sides sharing information about their respective civilizations. The humans presented a carefully selected overview of Earth's history, art, science, and culture, focusing on humanity's achievements and diversity. They showed images of great cities, famous landmarks, and examples of human creativity and ingenuity. The Villani, in turn, shared information about their own peaceful civilization, describing a world of gentle beauty where conflict was unknown and natural harmony was the foundation of their society. They spoke of their federation as a collection of similar worlds where different species lived together in mutual cooperation and shared learning. As the presentations continued, it became increasingly clear that the two civilizations had developed under very different circumstances. The humans casually mentioned things like earthquake-resistant architecture and flood control systems as examples of their engineering capabilities, while the aliens had never needed to develop such technologies, because their world simply did not present such challenges. The meeting took an unexpected turn when Minho, a Seoul University student who had been selected to represent Earth's younger generation, was invited to share his perspective on growing up in human civilization. He spoke enthusiastically about his studies and his hopes for the future, but then he made an offhand comment that changed everything. "I am sorry I was a few minutes late getting here this morning," Minho said with an apologetic smile. "We had a small earthquake back home, and it took a while for the subway system to get back to normal operations." The entire Villani delegation went completely silent, staring at Minho with expressions of shock and disbelief. The young human had just casually mentioned surviving what they would consider a catastrophic geological disaster, and he was apologizing for being late rather than seeking medical attention or psychological counseling. Kethvar cleared his throat carefully and asked, "When you say earthquake, do you mean actual movement of the ground itself?" Minho nodded cheerfully. Despite every safety protocol and warning from his own people, Ambassador Kethvar made a decision that shocked his entire delegation. He insisted on visiting Earth's surface to see for himself whether the planet was truly as dangerous as their readings suggested. The thought that an entire species could live normally on such a world seemed impossible, and he needed to understand how humans had achieved something that defied everything the Villani knew about habitable planets. Youngsu had been chosen as Earth's official tour guide because of his cheerful personality and his ability to speak several languages, though he had no idea why the aliens seemed so nervous about what he considered a perfectly routine visit to the Korean countryside. As someone who had grown up hiking in the mountains and camping in all kinds of weather, he thought of Earth as a beautiful and welcoming place that any reasonable person would enjoy exploring. "We have picked a really safe and boring location for your first surface visit," Youngsu explained enthusiastically as the shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere. "No cities, no crowds, just peaceful farmland and gentle hills where nothing exciting ever happens." Haeun, the geologist who had been brought along to answer any technical questions about Earth's structure, nodded in agreement while reviewing her notes. She had been instructed to keep her explanations simple and non-threatening, focusing on the stable and predictable aspects of the planet's geology rather than the more dramatic features that might cause unnecessary alarm. The shuttle landed in a grassy field surrounded by rolling hills and small farms, under a sky that looked deceptively peaceful to human eyes, but appeared ominous and unstable to the Villani delegation. Zilnara's instruments were detecting massive amounts of electromagnetic activity in the atmosphere, along with temperature and pressure variations that seemed to indicate some kind of ongoing atmospheric disturbance. "Your sky appears to be in a state of constant flux," Zilnara observed nervously, as she stepped out of the shuttle and looked up at the clouds moving overhead. "Are these normal atmospheric conditions, or are we witnessing some kind of weather emergency?" Young-Soo followed her gaze and saw nothing but a typical partly cloudy day with a light breeze. "This is perfectly normal weather for this time of year. Actually, it is quite nice today, not too hot or cold, and the clouds might bring a little rain later, which would be good for the crops." The casual way that Young-Soo mentioned the possibility of water falling from the sky made the entire alien delegation take a step backward. On Serenitas, moisture was delivered to plants through a gentle misting system that operated on a precise schedule, and the idea of uncontrolled water randomly dropping from above seemed chaotic and potentially dangerous. The tour began with a walk through the peaceful countryside, but within the first hour, the aliens experienced their first real taste of Earth's environmental challenges. Dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, and the air grew heavy with moisture and electrical charge that made the Villani's skin tingle in ways that felt decidedly unpleasant. "We should probably head back to the shuttle," Haeon suggested as she noticed the approaching storm system. "It looks like we might get some weather in the next few minutes." Before anyone could move, the first flash of lightning split the sky with a brilliant white light, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that made the ground shake beneath their feet. The Villani delegation threw themselves flat on the ground, convinced that they were under attack by some kind of atmospheric weapons system. "What was that explosion?" Kethvar shouted over the rumbling sound that continued to echo across the hills. "Are we being targeted by orbital bombardment platforms?" Young-Soo looked down at the terrified aliens with genuine confusion, then glanced up at the storm with the casual interest of someone checking the time. "That was just thunder. You know, the sound that lightning makes when it heats up the air, really quickly. It is totally harmless as long as you are not standing right next to where the lightning hits." The fact that Young-Soo could speak calmly about the possibility of being struck by electrical discharges from the sky only increased the aliens' terror. Zilnara was frantically taking readings that confirmed her worst fears about Earth's atmospheric conditions, while Kethavar was trying to understand how an entire species could consider such phenomena normal and harmless. The storm moved over them quickly, as summer thunderstorms often do, bringing heavy rain that soaked everyone within minutes and wind that bent the trees at angles that looked impossible to the visiting aliens. Young-Soo and Haeon stood in the downpour with the relaxed patience of people waiting for a bus, occasionally commenting on the storm's intensity and beauty. "This is actually a pretty mild storm," Haeon observed as she watched the rain creating temporary streams across the landscape. "The lightning is not too close, and the wind is probably only about 30 or 40 kilometers per hour. Nothing to worry about." The aliens huddled together under the shuttle's emergency shelter, staring in horrified fascination at the humans who seemed completely unaffected by what appeared to be a natural disaster. When the storm passed after about 20 minutes, leaving behind a landscape that sparkled with moisture and seemed refreshed by the violence it had just endured, the Villani could only stare in amazement. "Your species just survived an atmospheric attack," Zilnara said in a voice filled with awe and disbelief. "How are you not seeking medical attention or psychological counseling after such a traumatic experience?" Young-Soo laughed good-naturedly and shook the water out of his hair. "It was just a little thunderstorm. Actually, I kind of enjoyed it because the air smells so clean and fresh afterward, and the plants always look happier after a good rain." The tour continued, but the aliens were now viewing everything through the lens of their new understanding. That Earth was apparently a world where the sky itself could randomly become hostile. Every natural phenomenon that humans took for granted seemed like a miracle of survival to the Villani, who were beginning to suspect that they had discovered not just a new species, but a species of living legends. As they walked through the hills, Haeon pointed out various geological features with the enthusiasm of someone sharing her favorite hobby. She explained how the landscape had been shaped by millions of years of natural processes, casually mentioning things like volcanic activity, glacial movement, and tectonic shifting as if she were discussing the weather. "These hills were actually formed by ancient volcanic activity," she said cheerfully, pointing to the gentle slopes around them. "You can still see some of the old lava flows if you know what to look for, though everything has been dormant for thousands of years now." The word volcanic sent another wave of panic through the alien delegation, who were now realizing that they were standing on top of what had once been a zone of geological violence. The fact that humans lived and farmed in such areas seemed to confirm their growing suspicion that Earth's inhabitants were either incredibly brave or completely insane. The situation became even more surreal when they encountered Dong Min, a local farmer who was working in his fields despite the recent storm. The elderly man greeted them with a friendly wave and stopped his work to chat with the visitors, completely unaware that he was speaking to beings from another world. "Beautiful day after that little shower," Dongmin said with a smile, wiping soil from his hands. "The storm was just what we needed after such a dry week. Of course, we will have to keep an eye on the mountain over there because all this rain might trigger some slides, but nothing serious." Young-Soo translated the conversation for the aliens, who were now learning that humans not only survived random atmospheric attacks, but also had to deal with the possibility of entire mountainsides spontaneously deciding to relocate. The casual way that Dongmin mentioned landslides as a minor inconvenience was almost too much for the Villani to process. "When he says landslides," Kethvar asked weakly, "does he mean actual mountains falling down?" "Not whole mountains," Young-Soo replied, reassuringly. "Just parts of hillsides that get loose after heavy rain. Usually it is not a big problem unless you are right in the path, and people around here know which areas to avoid during storm season." The revelation that Earth had something called a storm season was another shock to the aliens, who were beginning to understand that the atmospheric attack they had just witnessed was not a rare emergency but a regular, predictable occurrence that humans planned their lives around. As the day continued, the aliens were introduced to more examples of Earth's casual hostility toward living things. They met insects that the Villani immediately classified as armored assault creatures, observed birds that seemed to defy gravity with their aggressive flight patterns, and learned about local wildlife that included animals capable of killing humans under the right circumstances. Jamin, a rescue coordinator who joined them for lunch, had to explain why Earth maintained a global network of emergency response teams that operated around the clock every day of the year. The aliens assumed this was for rare catastrophic events, but Jamin cheerfully explained that it was for daily life on a world where emergencies were simply part of the normal routine. "We get calls for everything," Jamin said as he shared stories from his career. The ocean expedition had seemed like a perfect opportunity to show the Villani delegation something peaceful and calming after their traumatic experience with Earth's atmospheric violence, but Sun-hee was beginning to suspect that her definition of peaceful might not match what the aliens were expecting. As a marine biologist who had spent her entire career studying Earth's oceans, she thought of the sea as a beautiful and fascinating environment full of amazing creatures that demonstrated the incredible diversity of life on their planet. The research vessel moved smoothly through the calm waters off the Korean coast, and Sun-hee was excited to share her knowledge with beings from another world who would surely appreciate the wonders of Earth's marine ecosystems. She had prepared a presentation about ocean life that focused on the beauty and complexity of underwater communities, carefully avoiding any mention of the more dramatic aspects of marine predation. "Our oceans cover more than 70% of Earth's surface," Sun-hee explained enthusiastically as the aliens gathered around her mobile laboratory on the ship's deck. "They contain millions of species that have evolved incredible adaptations for underwater life, and many of them are quite beautiful to observe." Zilnara was taking careful readings of the water with her scientific instruments, and her expression was growing increasingly troubled as she analyzed the data. The ocean appeared to be teeming with life forms that registered as potential threats on her equipment, and the water itself contained chemical compositions that seemed hostile to most known forms of life. "This liquid appears to be contaminated with high concentrations of sodium chloride and other potentially toxic substances," Zilnara observed carefully. "How do Earth's life forms survive in such a chemically aggressive environment?" Sun-hee blinked in surprise, then laughed with delight. "Oh, you mean the salt water. That is not contamination. That is just how oceans are supposed to be. The salt actually helps support many forms of marine life, and most ocean creatures need it to survive." The concept of life forms that required toxic chemicals to survive was difficult for the Villani to grasp, since their own planet's water sources were pure and gentle, requiring no adaptation or special tolerance from the creatures that lived in them. But this was only the beginning of their education about Earth's marine environment. Sun-Hee began pulling up samples from the ocean depths, using equipment that seemed unnecessarily complex to the aliens until they realized that she was essentially conducting military-grade reconnaissance on a hostile environment. Each sample revealed new horrors that challenged everything the Villani thought they knew about aquatic life. "This is one of my favorite creatures," Sun-Hee said cheerfully as she displayed a jellyfish in a clear container. "They are mostly water themselves, but they have these amazing stinging cells that they use to capture prey and defend themselves." The Villani stared at the translucent creature with expressions of fascinated horror. Kethvar leaned closer to examine what Sun-Hee was describing as a beautiful example of nature's efficiency, but all he could see was a weapon that disguised itself as a harmless blob of water until it could inject venom into unsuspecting victims. "When you say stinging cells," Kethvar asked nervously, "do you mean that this creature is capable of delivering toxins through direct contact?" "Exactly," Sun-Hee replied with obvious pleasure at his quick understanding. "Some jellyfish stings are just uncomfortable, but others can be quite dangerous to humans. We have to be careful around the really big ones or the tropical species with more potent venom." The fact that humans had to categorize their planet's life forms based on how likely they were to kill people was another piece of evidence that Earth was fundamentally different from any world the Villani had ever encountered. But Sun-Hee was just getting started with her presentation. She showed them fish that generated electrical discharges powerful enough to stun large prey, mollusks that could change color and shape to become living camouflage, and crustaceans that could strike with enough force to break through armor. Each example was presented with the enthusiasm of someone sharing her favorite art collection, but the aliens were hearing descriptions of biological weapons systems. "Electric eels are particularly fascinating," Sun-Hee continued, completely unaware of the growing horror on her audience's faces. "They can generate up to 600 volts of electricity, which is enough to kill a horse or knock an adult human unconscious." Zilnara was frantically taking notes while trying to understand how an entire planet could evolve creatures that used electricity as a hunting tool. On Serenitas, the most aggressive animal was roughly equivalent to Earth's butterflies, and the concept of predators that could kill with lightning was beyond anything in their experience. The situation became even more alarming when Sun-Hee casually reached into one of her sample containers and pulled out what she described as a completely harmless sea urchin. The spiny creature looked like a biological weapon to the aliens, but Sun-Hee handled it with the relaxed confidence of someone picking up a household tool. "These little guys are perfectly safe as long as you do not grab them carelessly," she explained while turning the urchin to show its various features. "The spines are sharp enough to puncture skin, and some species have mild toxins, but they are really quite docile unless they feel threatened." The casual way that Sun-Hee handled a creature covered in poisonous spikes was the final straw for Zilnara, who quietly fainted and had to be caught by her companions. The science officer had spent her entire career studying life forms across dozens of worlds, but nothing had prepared her for a species that considered venomous, spike-covered creatures to be pets. While the other aliens tried to revive Zilnara, Sun-Hee continued her presentation, moving on to what she considered the more impressive examples of marine life. She showed them octopi that could solve complex puzzles and escape from seemingly impossible enclosures, sharks that could detect electrical fields and track prey across vast distances, and whales that communicated across entire ocean basins using sound waves. "Sharks are really amazing predators," Sun-Hee said with obvious admiration. "They have been evolving for hundreds of millions of years, and they are perfectly designed for hunting. Their senses are so acute that they can detect a single drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool." Kethvar was beginning to understand why humans had developed such advanced technology and such complex societies. Living on a world where the oceans were filled with creatures that could track you by scent across impossible distances would certainly encourage the development of better defensive systems and more sophisticated survival strategies. Meanwhile, back on land, other members of the human delegation were inadvertently adding to the aliens' growing understanding of Earth's hostile nature. Taihan, a volcanologist who had been invited to discuss Earth's geological history, was explaining plate tectonics to the increasingly pale Villani representatives with the cheerful enthusiasm of someone describing a fascinating hobby. The really exciting thing about plate tectonics is that our planet's surface is constantly moving and changing, Taehyun said, while showing them computer models of continental drift. The continents are actually floating on top of molten rock, and they crash into each other over millions of years, creating mountain ranges and triggering volcanic activity. The revelation that Earth's solid surface was actually floating on a sea of molten rock was almost too much for the aliens to process. They had assumed that solid ground was, by definition, solid and stable, but humans lived on a world where the very foundation of their civilization was constantly shifting and occasionally exploded without warning. Rena, the meteorologist, tried to be helpful by explaining Earth's weather systems in terms that she thought would be reassuring to visitors from another world. Unfortunately, her explanation of hurricanes, tornadoes, and other severe weather phenomena only confirmed the aliens' worst fears about atmospheric warfare on Earth. The beautiful thing about our weather systems is how predictable they are once. You understand the underlying patterns, Rena said enthusiastically. We can track hurricanes for days before they make landfall, which gives people plenty of time to evacuate or prepare their homes for winds that can reach over 200 kilometers per hour. The fact that humans had developed evacuation procedures for routine weather events was another indication that Earth's environment was fundamentally hostile to life. The aliens were beginning to realize that what humans called civilization was actually an ongoing military campaign against a planet that was actively trying to kill everything that lived on it. Seung-jun, the seismologist, completed the educational disaster by explaining earthquake preparedness with the same casual attitude that someone might use to discuss seasonal clothing changes. He showed them building codes designed to withstand ground movement, emergency supplies that every household was supposed to maintain, and evacuation routes that were planned for every major city. The key to living safely in earthquake zones is just being prepared and knowing what to do when the ground starts moving, Seung-jun explained matter-of-factly. Most earthquakes are not really dangerous if you follow basic safety procedures and stay away from falling objects. The emergency meeting that Ambassador Kethvar requested with Hyunwoo was unlike any diplomatic session in the history of either species because it began with the aliens presenting what amounted to evidence that humanity was living on a world that should have been classified as uninhabitable by any reasonable galactic standard. The conference room on the orbital station felt heavy with tension as both sides tried to understand how such a fundamental misunderstanding had occurred. Minister Hyunwoo, Kethvar began with the careful tone of someone trying to deliver terrible news gently. We need to discuss some serious concerns about Earth's environmental classification. Our scientific analysis indicates that your world exhibits characteristics that would normally be associated with what the galactic community calls a Class 12 death world. Hyunwoo looked genuinely puzzled by this statement, glancing at his notes, as if he might have missed something important in their previous conversations. I am sorry, Ambassador, but I am not familiar with that term. What exactly do you mean by death world? Zil-Nara, who had recovered from her fainting episode but still looked pale and shaky, stepped forward with her scientific readings displayed on a portable screen. A death world is a planet where the environmental conditions are so hostile that normal life forms cannot survive without extensive technological protection. Class 12 is the highest danger rating we use, reserved for worlds where even short-term exposure can be fatal. The humans in the room exchanged confused looks because this description seemed to have nothing to do with Earth as they understood it. Hyunwoo leaned forward with genuine concern and asked, "Are you saying that our planet is dangerous for your people? We can certainly adjust the environmental controls or provide better protective equipment if needed." "No, you do not understand," Kethvar replied with a mixture of admiration and horror in his voice. "Earth is not dangerous for us because we have protective equipment. Earth is dangerous because your weather systems are capable of generating electrical attacks from the atmosphere. Your oceans contain creatures that hunt with biological weapons, and your planet's surface is floating on molten rock that occasionally explodes." Hyunwoo blinked several times as he tried to process this description of his homeworld. "Are you talking about thunderstorms and earthquakes and things like that? Those are just normal natural phenomena that happen sometimes. Every planet, probably, has similar processes." "No," Zil-Nara said firmly, her voice rising with excitement and disbelief. Every planet does not have similar processes. On Serenitas, our homeworld, the weather is gentle and predictable. Our oceans contain creatures that eat plants and sing beautiful songs, and our ground has been stable for millions of years. What you call normal natural phenomena would be classified as weapons of mass destruction on any civilized world. The room fell silent as the humans tried to understand what the aliens were telling them, while the aliens waited for the humans to grasp the implications of their survival on such a hostile world. Finally, Hyunwoo spoke in a voice that was carefully controlled but carried an undertone of growing realization. You are saying that other planets do not have storms or earthquakes or dangerous animals. That Earth is unusually hostile compared to other worlds that support life? Earth is not unusually hostile, Kethvar replied gently. Earth is impossibly hostile. According to every scientific model we have, complex life should not be able to evolve on a world with these characteristics, and intelligent life should certainly never develop the kind of peaceful, cooperative society that you have achieved. This revelation led to an extended discussion where both sides tried to understand how such different worlds could exist in the same universe. The humans described Earth's history and evolution with growing amazement as they realized that what they had always considered normal was actually extraordinary, while the aliens struggled to comprehend how an entire species could develop such incredible resilience without even realizing it. Ki-woo, Earth's emergency response chief, was called in to explain human survival capabilities, and his presentation inadvertently demonstrated just how far beyond normal galactic standards humanity had evolved. He described basic human physical abilities like endurance running, healing from injuries, and functioning under stress as if he were discussing simple facts about human biology. The average human can run continuously for several hours without stopping, Ki-woo explained while the aliens took frantic notes. We can function normally even when injured or exhausted, and our bodies can adapt to extreme temperatures, high altitudes, and various atmospheric conditions without technological assistance. Nari, a survival instructor, was brought in to demonstrate what humans considered basic wilderness skills, but her presentation looked like advanced military training to the watching aliens. She showed them how humans could create fire, find water, build shelter, and locate food in environments that would kill most galactic species within hours. These are just standard skills that we teach to children during camping trips, Nari said as she demonstrated how to start a fire using primitive tools. Any reasonably prepared human should be able to survive in the wilderness for several days, using only basic equipment and knowledge. The aliens watched in fascination and terror as this apparently normal human created flames using nothing but friction and dried plants, then explained how humans could find safe drinking water, identify edible plants, and construct weatherproof shelters using only materials found in nature. On their worlds, such skills would be considered magical abilities possessed only by legendary heroes. Wu Jin, a researcher who specialized in human evolution, provided the scientific context that finally helped the aliens understand what they had discovered. His explanation of human development as endurance predators on a high-gravity world with extreme weather variations painted a picture of evolutionary pressure that was almost unimaginable to species that had evolved in peaceful environments. Humans, developed as persistence hunters, Wu Jin explained while showing them models of early human anatomy. Our ancestors survived by chasing prey animals until they collapsed from exhaustion, which required incredible endurance and the ability to function in almost any environmental condition. We are literally evolved survivors. Yuna, an anthropologist, added cultural context that was equally revealing about human nature. She explained how human art, literature, philosophy, and social systems had all developed as responses to living in a world that presented constant challenges and required constant adaptation. Human culture is fundamentally based on cooperation in the face of adversity, Yuna said, as she showed them examples of human creativity and achievement. Our greatest works of art celebrate triumph over obstacles. Our philosophies help us find meaning in struggle, and our social systems are designed to help communities survive disasters that would destroy other civilizations. As the presentations continued, the aliens underwent a complete paradigm shift in their understanding of what they had encountered. They realized that they had not made contact with a typical spacefaring civilization that happened to live on an unusual planet. but with a species of incredibly advanced survivors who had achieved peace and prosperity despite living in conditions that would terrify most galactic species. "You are not just another member species for our Federation," HFY said with something approaching awe in his voice. "You are something completely new in our experience. A species of apex predators who chose cooperation over conquest, survivors who became philosophers, warriors who decided to become gardeners and artists." The implications of this discovery were staggering for both civilizations. The Vellani realized that humanity represented capabilities that no other known species possessed, while the humans began to understand that their casual attitude toward danger and their instinctive cooperation in crisis situations were not universal traits, but unique evolutionary advantages. The meeting concluded with both sides agreeing to completely restructure their relationship based on this new understanding. Instead of a standard trade and cultural exchange agreement, they began planning a partnership where humanity would serve as the Federation's emergency response specialists and survival experts. 3 days later, HFY and Zilnara returned to their fleet with a completely different mission than the one they had started with. Instead of establishing routine diplomatic relations with a new trading partner, they were returning with recommendations that humanity be invited to serve as the Federation's Planetary Defense and Emergency Response Corps. The Vellani Federation's Governing Council received their report with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, and within weeks, new messages were arriving at Earth from dozens of member worlds requesting human assistance with various crisis situations that their own species were not equipped to handle. The first request came from a world experiencing what they described as a severe atmospheric emergency that threatened their entire civilization. When Jiwan translated the message, she discovered that the aliens were asking for help dealing with a weather system that humans would classify as a light spring rain shower. Mireille found herself drafting humanity's response to this request.